didn't work at all on my phone.
Can you see now it's worth freaking out? It's just so stressful.
Oh, some of the
It looks great. Ah. We just made it live.
Find a home for this.
no,
Is he sure about it?
Yeah. Subsidy.
Hey, I got it. So I'm just doing it from my laptop. I think it might have been something to do with the data or Wi-Fi on my phone. Anyway, it's up. Yeah. So we'll see how we go. Hopefully that's cool. Have you got the link? So it should just be on the Doctors for the Environment Facebook page. So if there's anything, hopefully that's shareable now. Cool. Thanks, I think. Let me know. Send me a text if there are any issues, and I'll just jump up. Okay. No, I can actually see it.
Very well. It all looks good. It all looks great.
Good evening. Could all candidates please make their way out to the stage, and panellists, thank you.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. So shall we let
Yeah, the separation.
Okay, thank you very much everyone for being here. My name's Sibel Day. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, also qualified as a paediatrician, and I'm here in my capacity as being a doctor who lives in Wentworth and a member of Doctors for the Environment Australia. We're really thrilled to have three of the leading candidates here to answer your questions and talk about how they will respond to climate and health if they're elected. And I've just got a couple of things to remind people about. The usual one about please switch off your mobile phones or put them on silent, and that we're really keen to have a respectful and engaged evening, so we'll obviously want people to be asking things about climate and health and keeping all of our exchanges in a respectful, friendly way. I'm looking around, I'm really confident that that's what we're going to have, so that's fine. And have I forgotten anything? No. So I think the important next part of the evening is to have Auntie Lola, who has really kindly come to give us a welcome to country. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Nagambia everyone, which means hello in our Dharawal language. I'm a Dharawal beach girl elder from the La Perouse Aboriginal community, and it's right at the end of Anzac Parade. You can't go any further. You just have to go in the roundabout and come all the way back. I would like to start by paying my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander present here. It's a pleasure to welcome you here for the Health and Climate Forum, something that is very important to all of us. I work as an Aboriginal health worker for the Child and Family Health Team. I work with CESLA now, which is the South East Sydney Local Health District. But for many years, our team was with the City Children's Hospital Network. They keep changing us around, I don't know why. We work with children 0 to 5, so we do early childhood. And I've had that position for 18 years now. It is a big passion of mine, the health and well-being of children. I get involved in lots of things. One of them is a healthy housing project, and with all this rain and bad weather, it's not very good for our clients and their well-being with respiratory problems, asthma. It has increased a lot in Aboriginal children, so I think looking after our planet is a good thing. So traditionally our welcome to country was to ensure everyone felt welcome on our land. Today we welcome all and ask that they respect our land and culture. Our traditional land is from Sydney Harbour to the Illawarra region. Our people walk the land, travelling seasonally, allowing for the rejuvenation of food, either on land or in the ocean. As saltwater people, we also looked after the ocean traditionally, because that was our main source of food. Food was always shared amongst the tribes to ensure no one went hungry. There were no formal seasons for Aboriginal people. They knew and taught everyone through the climate, where they knew that there was plenty of food and water and it would sustain, and they knew the weather patterns. And it wasn't like every 4 months the seasons changed. They just walked until they knew where to get fresh food, especially on land. Oral language was the way we communicated through storytelling, song, dance, music and art. We still use these methods for our children in a traditional and contemporary way to teach them their culture and to ensure it continues for generations. Teaching our culture to others also enhances the importance of sharing knowledge of Australia's Aboriginal history. I think that people could all learn from Aboriginal people now with all this, the climate the way it is now. And as David Attenborough says, we are killing our own planet. Our culture is one of the oldest living cultures in the world, and we have survived for over 60,000 years. On behalf of the La Perouse Local Aboriginal Land Council, my ancestors and community, I wish you all a warm welcome and ask that you respect the land as our ancestors did. And may our ancestors walk with you and keep you safe on your journey. Enjoy your evening, and Nundawabi. Nundawabi is see you later. Us as Aboriginal people, we don't say goodbye because that's part of our sorry business. We only use that word to say goodbye to our loved ones when they pass. Thank you very much for having me and enjoy your evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I would like to say we need to let Auntie Lola go because she has some important things that she needs to be at. So thank you. And I would also just like to echo the comment about from a health professional point of view, it's really clear that working with and learning from First Nations people is part of the solution to the problems we face with climate and health. And to echo Auntie Lola's words about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people being here on the land that we now call Australia for 60 to 100,000 years and not having caused human-caused climate change in all of that time and having cared for the land. So back to my job description for this evening. So I do want to just talk a little bit about the impacts of climate change on health, and Helen's going to help make sure that I stay to time. So I think the first thing to say about that is it's wonderful to see all of you here tonight and to know that whoever's online is going to see what we're talking about and hear what we're talking about, because people coming to understand about the importance of taking action on climate change to protect health is one of the things that can make a really big difference. In terms of the impacts that we know about, a lot of people are aware of the impacts of bushfires and floods and droughts, and they are really important. But actually in Australia, as well as all of the impacts of those which do matter, the impact of heat is actually causing more harm to health in Australia than all of the other climate-driven disasters put together. So in terms of heat, we have about 3,000 Australian people die each year that we know are clearly linked to extreme heat that wouldn't be happening without climate change. And unfortunately that is going to go up, but by taking effective action we can both mitigate against the extent to which it goes up, so by cutting fossil fuel emissions this decade, we can do something to reduce the extent of that rise in temperature, and also we can adapt so that people can be better protected when it is hot. One of the things that people are probably perhaps less aware of is the mental health impacts. So I think people are now pretty well aware of climate distress and people being appropriately and understandably distressed when they actually really come to sit and think about what we're facing with climate change. One of the challenges around that is that that's actually valid and appropriate, and in fact you would question, or I would question, the health of having a response where you don't feel at least some concern or distress when you genuinely think about what we're facing with climate change. And at the same time, the things that help with that include taking action. So actually being here tonight, being willing to ask some questions and being willing to answer some questions are all important steps to manage your own mental health in response to climate change. And one of the other misunderstandings that often comes up is the idea that by taking climate action that may increase people's distress. That's actually false. It's not true. There's really clear medical scientific evidence that actually being involved in action and seeing leaders, including government, taking action is protective for people's mental health. So in terms of reducing mental health distress, seeing action by leaders is likely to reduce mental health distress very quickly. The other things people are perhaps less aware of, other than climate distress, are more hard to see. So when we look at the increase in extreme weather events like floods, fires, and the increase in droughts, when people experience a trauma and a disaster like a fire or a flood or a severe storm, often the physical impacts may be seen quickly, but the mental health impacts take months to years to show up. And by having communities and leaders take action, that's actually protective for people's mental health. So seeing our leaders, seeing community and government leaders actually stepping up, preparing, planning for the disasters we can no longer avoid and taking action to reduce them actually improves people's mental health. So the same trauma, if you know that everyone's done everything they can to minimise that and to help you manage it, you will do better from a mental health point of view than if you see leaders not willing to engage, not willing to take action. And from a temperature point of view, I think this is something else that I guess I just want to use this chance to let people know about, is that even though it's only a fraction of a degree that people might hear about, that equates to heat waves of 40 and 40 plus degrees for several days in a row, because the average is over the whole year or the whole season, depending on which data you look at. So in India at the moment, they're having 46 and 49 degree days, but we've had some of those in Australia as well. And we need to understand that each fraction of degree that we prevent the temperature going up, we're going to have huge benefits in terms of mental and physical health. Okay, now I better make sure I hand on. So really glad that everyone is here. I'm sorry, the other bit I probably do need to acknowledge is that I'm sorry that Norman Swan couldn't join us this evening. He did originally plan to and then wasn't able to, but I'm very grateful that Dr. Michael Bonning from the New South Wales AMA, who is also a local, is here to help me help everyone get in. And Dave Sharma was also invited back in early March, and we did offer to change the date so that he could attend, but he still wasn't willing to attend our event, which is obviously disappointing given that he's our current local federal member. Okay, thank you. I'll pass on to Michael.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I am the poor man's Norman Swan. My name is Michael Bonning. I am chair of the AMA here in New South Wales. I am a local resident, and from what you've just heard about, about heat, about the distress that climate change causes, I want to talk very briefly from a slightly different perspective. As a threat to humanity, this was classed as the greatest threat of the 21st century to global health. We think of that within our context here locally in Australia, but this is a part of a political scenario that we find ourselves in, which is an area in which the AMA is commonly finds itself, and thinking about that in terms of Australia's role as a leader, not just and our politicians as leaders, not just in our own community, but as leaders to the world. We are one of the richest countries in the world. We have, therefore, in some ways, some of the greatest moral responsibility to be a leader and have the ability to protect those people, both within our own communities and within other communities, who are far, far, far more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. It is also important to remember that when our climate, and as our climate does change, the mitigants that we can put in place are incredibly important. But for the health system that we all work in or rely upon at different points in our lifetime, we recognise that as there are changes to climate, that actually is likely to reduce the efficiency of our health system to do what it needs to do, given that it places strain on the people, it places strain on the buildings, budget, but also our ability to change the way in which our economy, climate, and society goes over this forthcoming century. So from the perspective of being here as the AMA, we are incredibly proud to partner with DEA. We are incredibly proud also to be here to listen to candidates and leading candidates talk about what is important and how their policies will impact on climate and also on health. So thank you very much again for joining us, and you now get to hear from the important people. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Michael. And I know you know that doesn't mean me. So we are going to now ask some questions of the people that you've come to listen to and ask questions of. We did put this question also to the current Liberal federal member, Dave Sharma, and he didn't choose to give us a reply. So this is the first question, and I think we've got that we're doing this. It was originally alphabetical, so I'm going to start with David because you're here on behalf of Dominic. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay, in that case, I'm not going. So Tim, you're up. No, very good. Sorry, I got the Kanak and yeah, okay. Point taken. Tim, I do want to ask the first question. Given we need
opportunity to meet with people and talk in detail about your policies, so I'm very grateful for that. This is my third time running in Wentworth, and I'm really clear that the people of Wentworth want action on climate change. In Australian politics, climate change has become a pendulum, or rather a wrecking ball. The Labor Party gets in, puts in things, or tries to put in things like emission trading schemes, gets in a carbon tax, Abbott turns up, knocks it out. We turn up and say, why don't we do a few more electric cars? And Morrison sort of decides that that's going to wreck tradies' weekends. And we've had this toxic sort of backwards and forwards. We have to stop that. And I think this is the election where that will happen. And I believe the Labor government will be a government that can change that. We need to make action on climate change a political object that can't be taken away, and Australians don't want to be taken away from them. Just like we've made Medicare and free education, they were things the Labor Party gave to the Australian population that no political party can take it away. And we need to make climate action like that. So the specific policies of the Labor Party are things like the on upgrading the grid. Doesn't sound very sexy or exciting, just like the NBN didn't sound very sexy or exciting. But during the pandemic, when we had to all work from home, it was the NBN that made that possible. And we need to do that for the power system. We'll also be putting in $100 million for solar banks, $200 million for community batteries, and investing in people through TAFE for new energy apprenticeships. There'll be 10,000 of those. When you're driving a new Tesla, your mechanic who fixes internal combustion engines won't know how to fix that. But with Labor's policy, we'll be educating people on how to make that transition and those changes. And Labor policies will be fully funded and costed and understood. My parents were hippies. I grew up with people tinkering with solar panels and windmills and lead battery systems at an age. I know the technology we need to change is already here. We just have to rapidly adopt alternative energy. Solar and wind are the key things that will change it. We need to electrify everything at a rapid rate. That's what we really need to do. Having run for Wentworth before, realised that people wanted action on climate change, but I also realised that we had the lowest solar uptake in the country in Wentworth. And why was that? It's because most people, 60%, live in apartment buildings. And to get solar from the roof of your apartment building to the person living inside the apartment building has many barriers. Legal, technical, financial, stratas. And so I was going to form a not-for-profit because I worked out a way to do that. Is that 30 seconds? And I found a way, and I went and got voted on to the Waverley Council in order to make those changes. But we're also working with vehicle charging outputs, points right throughout the area, and putting
Thank you very much, Tim. That's great. And so now I think, having got myself all muddled with all of the names, I'm now going to be asking Allegra the same question. Do you want me to read the question again? No, that's fine. Is this on? Yeah. Thank you very much for having me today, from Doctors at the Environment and also AMA for supporting this event as well. I also want to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders, past, present and emerging. Look, I'm a local Wentworth resident and I'm standing as an independent candidate. I'm a Allegra spender. I'm a mum, I'm a renewable energy advocate, that's sort of about 10 years, and I've been running businesses for the last 12 years. And the reason why I'm standing is because we need to take urgent action on climate change and we need to have better government. And I've just given up waiting on the sidelines, hoping that's going to happen. Regardless, I think that we need to take this into our own hands, so I'm running as an independent in this seat. You know, Australia faces many challenges at the moment. You know, we look at, you know, financially, you know, we have low unemployment, but we have high debt, $1 trillion of debt, and we also have low productivity and low wage growth. You know, we have a COVID pandemic, which has had an enormous impact on our health systems and aged care. And also we have climate change. And I think you acknowledge in your opening that is a health crisis, climate change, but it's also a defence and a foreign policy. Has deep defence and foreign policy implications as well. You know, and in this uncertain time that we are facing, you know, the poor action that we are taking on climate change has implications not only just for for the environment, it has implications for our place in the world and our economic future. But I'm also very optimistic. I believe that Australia, as one of the sunniest, windiest places on earth, has a unique opportunity to take these opportunities and become a clean energy superpower. And so what I will be doing as an independent is absolutely advocating, legislating and voting on actions that take that forward. I want to briefly outline my overall policy area before I jump into climate change in particular. So the key areas that I'm focused on is climate, so to realise the economic benefits, but also to ensure that we do what is right environmentally. I'm standing on integrity because I want better government and I want a government held accountable by things like a federal ICAC. I'm standing on a future-focused economy because I believe that if we face forwards into the future, then we have the best opportunity for our children's prosperity. I'm standing on a sense of kindness and decency because those are the values of the community of Wentworth and they need to be brought out in our policies. In terms of climate, I think there are three key areas that I'm standing on. Firstly, it's about the governance structure. Secondly, it's about a sector-by-sector approach. And thirdly, it's about how we support the people through this. So in terms of governance, we need clear legislated targets for 2030 as well as 2050 and other interim targets to make a real difference and to give business the certainty to be able to invest. So I'll be backing Zali Stepper's climate bill that puts forward those legislative targets and also creates an independent oversight to make sure we are holding ourselves accountable to the actions we said we need to take. But we then need to look at a sector-by-sector approach. And so from an electricity point of view, I'm advocating and will be supporting a strong transformation into renewable energy backed by hydro and batteries. You know, we can get to 75-80% by 2030. At the same time, what we need to do is we need to invest in changing our transport infrastructure. I'm advocating for emission standards because these are both have good health outcomes, which are really important. We are one of the only countries in the developed world that doesn't have emission standards, and that will that will fast track the uptake of electric vehicles and give us more electric vehicles offered to see. I'll go faster now. Then there are other policies both at the industrial level and at the agricultural level. And we need to stop fossil fuel subsidies, which are around over $10 billion a year, and that's another core platform for me. And then finally, we need to change. We need to think about how we support our communities through this, both in terms of those coal and gas communities who currently mine for fossil fuels, but also those communities like those in Lismore, so that we're spending more on resilience and less on disaster relief. As an independent, I can represent this community. I can harness the views of this community. I can harness the expertise of this community to advocate, put forward legislation, and vote every single time in the interest of this community. And that's what I'll do if I'm elected. Thank you. Thank you very much. Awesome. Great. And yeah, lovely to have all of you here. So, David, can I ask you to come and speak? And so just to explain, David is here on behalf of, I think you all know that he's here on behalf of the Greens, but he's here on behalf of Dominic White-Canuck, who would have been here, but he's unable to for reasons that are outside of his control. So he sends his apologies, and we're really pleased that, David, you're able to step in.
Thanks very much to Doctors for the Environment and the AMA for putting this forum on. And I too want to acknowledge that this is Gadigal land that we're gathered on here today, and thank Aunty Lola for her welcome. And to take on board what she said and the extreme generosity of First Nations peoples who, despite what we have done to First Nations culture and land over the last 2.5 centuries, continue to welcome us onto their country, offer their wisdom, offer that strength, and walk with us and teach us how, from their collective knowledge of living on this continent for 60 or 70,000 years, how to actually live in harmony with this continent. We have so much to learn from First Nations peoples. So look, I do give an apology from Dom White-Canuck. He's up north on sorry business, and Dom's a proud Torres Strait Islander. And if you've ever worked in First Nations justice issues, and I've spent a fair bit of that in the last 10 years, there is so much sorry business, so many funerals, so much early death. And we talk about health, we talk about social justice and environmental justice, and it does start with First Nations justice. So what would we do by 2030? Well, the first thing we need to do is keep coal, oil and gas in the ground. I mean, that is really it. That's where it starts. You can set all your targets, you can do whatever you like, but Australia's global carbon footprint is the 3rd biggest on the planet because coalition are going into this election saying that they support 114 new or expanded coal, oil and gas projects, including spending our money, public money, to open them up. And yeah, maybe the climate war has ended between those two parties because they've just given up and handed over to the fossil fuel industry, and nobody in Australia is made safer or better by that. So it starts by keeping coal, oil and gas in the ground and making sure those 114 projects don't happen. That's the starting point. We have a policy to see a 75% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. How will we do that? First of all, by keeping that coal, oil and gas in the ground. Secondly, by rapidly transitioning to 100% renewables. We know it is super achievable. A study by the University of Newcastle pointed out 15 years ago how that was achievable with technology 15 years ago. We've gone ahead in leaps and bounds. And I know we can do this stuff because I've done some of it at a state level. I sat there with the New South Wales Environment Minister and Energy Minister when he came to us and said he wanted to have legislation to house, a pretty toxic place, full of Mark Lathams and Grazies and the like. And I said, yes, I think it is possible. And we sat down, I said, but we want some extra stuff. We want more than 3, we want 5 renewable energy zones. We want First Nations peoples to benefit. We want investment in green hydrogen. And if we're willing to work together on this, we will get this legislation through, and we did. And we broke a deadlock in the New South Wales Parliament, and eventually we got Labor on board as well, and we managed to change politics, but not by surrendering. Not by surrendering, but by having forward-looking policy and using the balance of power that we have in a mixed crossbench in the New South Wales Parliament to help deliver on that. So it is super achievable and possible, but it doesn't start by surrendering to the fossil fuel lobby. And we know the fossil fuel lobby keeps funding the Labor Party and the Coalition, and they keep making donations to them. Corporations don't donate. Corporations buy things, and they are buying our politicians. We need to ban fossil fuel donation from our political system. So I'm really excited. At the end of this election, I could be one of hopefully 12 Green senators in that balance of power in the Senate. And we can hopefully see more Greens elected downstairs, more and hopefully progressive independents, forming a progressive crossbench in both houses of Parliament. And think how exciting that would be. Think the pressure that would. So I am super excited. We are 26 days away from being able to say former Prime Minister Scott Morrison. We are 26 days away from changing that Parliament, and we better make sure we do everything over the next 26 days to make it happen.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to have all of you respond to Well, we will do this soon, and each of the candidates will have 2 minutes to respond, so it's shorter than the other one. Okay, all right, we'll start with that one. I might read that one out. I'll pass you that. Okay, so the first question that we have is related to both climate and health from Dr. Hull, and the question is, to all of the candidates, what will you do if you're elected to introduce significant motor vehicle emission standards and educate the public about the detrimental effects of vehicle emissions?
Remember, we're keeping you to 2 minutes for your responses.
Okay, so perhaps we'll do it in the opposite order. That's probably fair, I think. Okay, so David, that means you're up first.
I reckon it'll be quickest if we all sit down and do it. But the Greens have a very clear commitment on emission standards to adopt at a minimum the European emission standards, because we know that that's essential for, first of all, reducing the amount of pollution from internal combustion engines, but also when you look at those standards, they actually drive the electric vehicle transformation that we need. Because you look at the overall emissions from the fleet of vehicles being sold, and the only way you can meet those European standards is with a surge of electric vehicles. You know why we're not getting electric vehicles entering into our market? Because we don't have those standards. That's why people who want to get an electric vehicle are on a 6, 12 or 18-month wait list, because none of the global manufacturers are prioritising Australia because we have terrible standards. And they are sending their electric vehicles fleets into states in the United States, into Europe and other parts of the world, Japan, where they have those standards. So absolutely, we legislate for those standards and we do it as a matter of urgency. But we also build a $2 billion national electric charging network, publicly owned, not owned by private corporations, publicly owned, so at cost delivery. And you do those two things together and we drive the transformation to electric vehicle fleet. You don't do either of those and we're in real trouble.
I also very much support emission standards. I think it is, as I said earlier, 80% of the cars in the world have standards. In the UK, they have 3 times the number of models of electric vehicles than they do in this country, and that's because we don't have emission standards. So we need to have emission standards because they will both increase, both for the health benefits, but also because this will actually accelerate our uptake of electric vehicles. And at the same time, we also need increased infrastructure in terms of charging, particularly in communities like Wentworth, where 60% of the community is in strata or apartments, where you do need more public infrastructure, as well as change to the strata laws, and I support you very much on that, Tim, to make that there. I think that we have, the part of the question was the opportunity to convey this, and I think someone said to me the other day, well, rather than, you can have cars powered by Australian sunshine or, dirty foreign imported oil. And I think that's I thought from a slogan point of view, I thought that was actually a really strong point. But I think it's actually about having, using the public advertising that we do have in this country, and there's budget for that, instead of promoting policies that have been vehicles, both for the benefits from a cost of living point of view, the benefits from a health point of view, and the benefits actually from a defence and fuel security point of view. So those would be my key supporters.
Tim.
Labor is focused on electrifying everything post this election, and focused on providing subsidies to sell electric vehicles and to increase the infrastructure to support electric vehicles. And to be clear, Labor does not have an emissions policy. They have been attacked at the last election for that, and for that reason, they're moving away from that and focusing on the positive of getting everybody into electric vehicles.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you very much. So, yeah, we'll keep swapping around, if that's okay. It's lovely to see the cooperation and collaboration, and that is exactly what they've said we need to do in terms of responding to the health impacts of climate change and protecting us against them, is we all need to work together. So, excellent. So the next question is from Justin Bowra, who is from Wentworth. The question is about both climate and health. and it's what do you propose to do to aid Pacific Island nations given their dire risk of climate-induced inundations and their stated position that Australia is prioritising our economy ahead of their lives and livelihoods as Pacific Islanders. So what do you propose to do to aid Pacific Island nations in that context?
Thank you very much. And I think that's absolutely a great question. And again, it touches, I think, on the implications of climate change on defence, on foreign policy, and on humanitarian issues across the world. So I think in terms of Australia's support for Pacific Island nations, we have cut our aid to Pacific Islander nations, and I think I'd absolutely suggest that we reverse that. I think that was a very short-term and very pretty stupid thing to do. We used to have, ABC actually into the Pacific as well in terms of the support for great journalism. And again, I think that is something that I absolutely support that we bring back. And I think that it's in terms of we need to work respectfully and openly with our Pacific Island nations and say to them, we take climate change seriously, and we as a country and as part of the Pacific will stand with you and stand up globally to make real action here. I think they absolutely know that we have been a climate wrecker rather than a country that can really lead the world in terms of climate change, and they expect us to step up. I think that then we need to work very closely with the Pacific Island nations to say how can we support them through their own adaptation and resilience, as well as through their own industrialisation in renewable energy, because I think that is the opportunity for Australia to work as an appropriate and concerned partner with the Pacific Island nations, and that will be good for climate. It will be good for our relationships and security in the area, and from a justice point of view, it's absolutely required.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks. I'm just quickly looked up the Labor Party policy because they put out a new one today, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't misrepresenting it. I think climate action has had a serious impact on the defence of our country. The Liberal Party has vacated the playing field in the Pacific. They're not supporting them on climate change, and they're not supporting them in many other ways. We've left the door open for China, our biggest geopolitical rival in the area, to begin to establish bases in the Solomons. And I think this is a direct result of this current government ignoring climate action and the impact it has on our Pacific neighbours. And that has to stop. So the Labor Party is going to increase the amount of money that they spend on aid to Pacific Asian nations, which includes climate action, to $525 million over the next 4 years. But they've also got a special partnership for funding for specific climate action projects. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you can't be a good neighbour while you're actively promoting policies that destroy your neighbour's home. And that's it, really, for Australia and our relations with the Pacific. Our climate policies, our export coal industry, our export gas industry, is a significant global player in destroying the Pacific's home. The month before last, I had the real privilege of doing a forum with Anatole Tong, the former president of Kiribati. And I don't know if you remember him going repeatedly into the United Nations. Initially, when nobody knew where Kiribati was and why on earth he was going on about climate change in 2003, but then his voice grew and his demands grew because the justice of the demands from Pacific peoples to actually ensure that their culture and their islands can survive. I mean, that's what's at stake for the Pacific with climate, whether or not their culture and their islands actually survive over the next 50 to 100 years. And his message that he wants to be conveyed in this federal election is pretty simple. It's keep the coal, oil and gas in the ground. Don't open these new 114 projects. And be a global leader and be a good neighbour to the Pacific. That's where it actually starts and ends for the Pacific for us, for climate justice. And you can put $520 million in aid to try and build climate resilience. But no money is going to save the Pacific if we get runaway climate change. And the Greens have been committed for the last 2 decades to see Australia's aid budget hit what our UN commitment is, which is 0.7% of GDP. I think Labor have said over the next 10 years they may get it to 0.4 or 0.5. Tim will correct me. And the Coalition are seeing it go down and down and down and down and down. So yes, we need to have increased aid assistance, but it starts by not destroying your neighbour's home.
Thank you to all for all those answers, and I think this probably gives us a good transition into this next question, thinking about things as Australia as a global leader. This comes from Nick Williams, who is from the electorate of Wentworth, and it's about both health and climate change. After COP26, the UN Secretary-General has said that critical health goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is a lie, but on life support. At COP26, Australia won the Colossal Fossil Award for being the most resistant to effective action to address climate change. How can Australia change from being left behind to being a leader on the global stage?
We're starting from very far behind. A decade of inaction is hard for anybody to overcome. No matter whether you're going to potentially form a government, as Labor could, or be strong crossbenchers who are putting the feet to the fire of the major parties. But I think we've always been a country that has been able to innovate. We're just not allowed to innovate in this category. You know, the Liberal Party has been actively holding us back. The Labor Party's plans to spend $3 billion on innovation in new technology. The Liberal Party will say that we'll lose jobs and prices will go up. It's not true. We'll create jobs. We'll create new jobs. The transition to the new economy, to spending $20 billion to improve the grid, that's an enormous opportunity. To put in all the solar charging stations, this is a great opportunity for us. And we can become global leaders, and we will become global leaders.
What if dealing with climate change was absolutely amazing? What if that meant that we became a global energy superpower by exporting renewable energy? And what if, imagine if we had a government right now that was sending a delegation off to Germany and saying, hey, you don't much like Russian gas, why don't we jointly invest in a huge green hydrogen export industry, and we'll get that up and running over the next decade. Imagine, but could you imagine Scott Morrison turning up and trying to do that? But imagine what kind of opportunities there are for us. But also I think we need to answer some of the real anxiety about the change. Like, nobody likes change. People get frightened and scared of change. That's one of the reasons I was really proud to be up in Newcastle with Adam Band, launching the Greens transition plan for those coal-dependent communities.
Sorry,
No, that's okay. For those coal-dependent communities, so that we have a job-for-job guarantee for the coal miners as they exit out of thermal coal. Now, we need to be out of thermal coal by 2030. And then we have a 10-year job-for-job guarantee designed in such a way, though, that it encourages investment and new industries in those same coal communities. So that we have the government wage subsidy investing in and building the new industries that we know will come if we have a huge amount, sometimes free. We have so much renewable energy that it will sometimes be free. And we build those industries and jobs in the Hunter, in the Illawarra, in the places where we shut down the coal mines. I mean, it's actually really exciting what we can do. And, of all the things that I'm particularly excited about, I really want to extend those renewable energy zones that we have now in the Hunter and the Illawarra about 50 k's offshore and have this enormous offshore wind industry. Because the Maritime Union of Australia has actually mapped, together with a series of global experts, mapped our wind resource. And just off between Wollongong and Newcastle, there is like 1.8 gigawatts of constant renewable energy offshore, which provides constant, really low-cost energy which we can pump straight into those industrial heartlands in the Illawarra and Newcastle. I mean, that's exciting. And I think we need to get people excited about change.
I think the key action I think we need to take is to give business certainty about where the country is going, because I feel very confident talking to a lot of businesses around Wentworth actually and beyond that we have the tools, we have the technology, and we actually have the appetite within business and within the community to make real change in the next decade. But we need certainty about what is expected and what are the incentives and investment required by business to do this. For example, in Wentworth, I've spoken to a business that has invented a film that you can put on planes and on boats that mimics the skin of sharks, that reduces the amount of fuel required by these planes and boats because they increase the aero and hydrodynamism. Like, that's the inventiveness of this community, and that's the inventiveness of what Australia can do if we actually have the incentives. And this same company talks about the difference on working with the Trump administration versus the wholesale difference in working with the Biden administration on this sort of technology. So we need an absolute change from government policy, but we need certainty with legislated targets of at least 50% reduction by 2030, because the Business Council of Australia says we can achieve that. And if you get business behind this, that is how we can absolutely deliver these opportunities.
So really there we were, in all cases we were talking about a lot of incentives and disincentives to doing certain things in our community, and giving certainty to business as well, which is very, very important. We'll take our way to the next question from Sean Watson, who's from the electorate of Wentworth, who asked the question: Australia's fossil fuel subsidies, so an incentive, hit $10.3 billion. That's helpfully worked out to be $22,000 per minute, at a time when we urgently need to stop extracting and burning fossil fuels. Harvard University research indicates that fossil fuels are responsible for 1 in 5 deaths globally. What are you and your party going to do about stopping fossil fuel subsidies?
Well, that's a pretty simple one for us. We're going to end the fossil fuel subsidies. That's it. This forum will go for a bit over an hour, and every hour I think it's about $1.2 million that is just churned off into fossil fuel subsidies to actually make things worse. And think what you could do if you redirected that money into positive incentives and public investment in renewables. It would just be an extraordinary change. And we can do it, and that's actually one of the core changes that we want to have in the first 100 days of a new government.
Wow.
I agree with you on that, to be honest, and it's one of my key platforms is to end fossil fuel subsidies as well. I think that's an absolutely crucial change that needs to happen. You see that both in terms of things like the subsidies for diesel and for fossil fuels, but you also see that in the government's investment and the federal government's investment, and to be honest, both of the major parties' investment in fossil fuel projects. I don't think that's appropriate use of government fund. I think, frankly, it's a waste of government money from a danger of stranded assets, but it's also a terrible waste of our money in terms of what we need to do to transform this economy.
Labor's focus is on increasing the amount of alternative energy available into the grid and into vehicles, and they don't have a policy to reduce fossil fuel subsidies.
Okay, thank you for answering, everyone, and again, thank you for being gutsy enough to all turn up and be here to answer the questions. Really appreciate that. We've got one more question to go. There's just this next one is very similar to the last one. So, do you want to have my co-host is just going to have a quick look, because we might just try and get one that's not asking the same question. Sorry, everybody. Right, we got one? Ah, fantastic. Okay, great. All right. Okay, lovely. Thank you. So we have a question from Doug Endercy from Wentworth. Thank you very much, Doug. And the question is that military experts are saying that climate change is Australia's biggest security threat. How is it? In what way?
I think we spoke about this earlier. The Pacific nations are critical to the defence of our country, and they are the nations already experiencing enormous change from climate action. And we've withdrawn from that area. We've reduced the amount of support we give to them, and that has created a very real threat to us now, with China signing the deal with Solomons. And that completely changes the way that we're potentially able to defend our nation. So climate change and not dealing with the problems that our neighbours have because of climate change is a real threat today.
Thank you.
Look, I think it's both climate change is, I think, a threat to the Pacific, and it's an existential threat to the Pacific. But I think the transformation of the energy system in the next 30 years is going to be one of the defining changes that the globe goes through from an how the response to the war in the Ukraine, where Europe is dependent on Russian gas, and there's dynamics that play out in terms of energy transformation in this period of time are going to really dictate what happens across the globe. So when I think about climate change from a security point of view, I see it absolutely from the point of the Pacific. I see it from the point of what's happening in Europe. But it's also, I think, about Australia's domestic security. And I mentioned before fuel security. We have, I think, about 20 days worth of fuel access in this country at the moment. If we had cut off access to that foreign imported fuel, because we import 90% of our fuel, the shortages that would hit us point of view, it's absolutely crucial that we remove our dependence on foreign and imported energy and reap the sort of lucky country that we are in terms of our abundant renewable energy resources. So that is, I think, another dimension to why I think action on climate change, and particularly from a transport sector point of view, is absolutely vital.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of energy security, us transforming to 100% renewables and electrically powered economy provides us with an enormous amount of energy security that we don't have. It also, if we do this globally, it disempowers some of the most toxic regimes on the world, on the planet. I mean, it disempowers Russia. Russia's military is funded by the fossil fuel industry. Saudi Arabia, Iran, these are countries that have had quite very, hostile impacts on international relations, all funded by the fossil fuel industry. Imagine taking all that money and wealth away from some of the most toxic regimes on the planet, and instead democratising power, publicly owned renewable energy. I mean, it's an exciting prospect in terms of our energy security, but also in changing some of those geopolitical dynamics that have really been the cause of most of the wars in the last 40 years. We can take that away with the global transformation in energy. But also if you're thinking about our region, and we've spoken about the insecurity in the Pacific, and that clearly, being a bad neighbour is not the way you make friends with the Pacific. But if you wanted to have a look to the near north of us, there have been predictions about what significant climate change will do to Indonesia and the Philippines, and it's really, really distressing. Like already relocating Jakarta, but very substantial potential for a major social unrest in our near north, because they're going to be smashed by climate change in a way that it's pretty hard to understand what's going to happen to those already fragile countries. And that kind of instability in our near north is one of the deeply frightening outcomes if we don't address climate change. And of course that insecurity puts us in a very precarious defence perspective. So imagine if dealing with climate change made the world keep safer, disempowered fossil fuel industry, stopped those wars, and actually kept our neighbourhood far more stable. I think it's really exciting what we can do.
Thank you. We have one more question, which is a sort of modified version of a question. So thank you for Moira Main from Wentworth for raising mental health as the topic for this question. I'm actually just going to shift it a little bit, and I'm very happy to ask the full question as well. So the full question is, how are you going to resource all the mental health demands arising from flood and fire, etc.? I'm just going to add to that, are you going, let me just rephrase that, how are you or your party going to respond to the opportunity to prevent the rises in suicidal behaviour and mental health presentations to emergency that we are already seeing from climate change, but that can be prevented by having effective climate action now? And I guess I'll add the complexity of, and can you have a think about how we're going to respond to the ones we can't fix? But probably the first bit is, we know that around between 9,000 and 40,000 extra suicides will happen in the USA and Mexico by 2050 with our current trajectory of global warming related to climate change that would not have occurred without climate change. We know that Australia, our leading cause of death for young people and teenagers is already suicide. And I'm sorry, I do want to acknowledge that this can be a difficult topic for people. I guess I'm raising it because this is an opportunity to prevent this from getting worse. And there are so few things that we know are effective. What are you going to do in terms of making sure that children and teenagers and the rest of our mental health is protected from these impacts? And if you've got comments about how to meet the needs of the ones that are coming, then that's great too. Okay, that's probably enough for me.
In 2 minutes. Right, let me go. Okay, sure. Look, I think the first piece is action, because I think, I think some of this concern around climate change is because there's so much concern about a lack of action, and there is a lack of action. And so absolutely, I think if Australia becomes a leader, not a laggard in terms of climate policy, that I hope will have a positive impact. In terms of, Lismore, and, you think of those who have to deal with changes in climate, 97 cents out of our disaster money that we spend in this country is spent on cleaning up after disasters, and 3 cents is actually about building the resilience to ensure that we don't feel the worst of the most badly hit from climate in Sydney. Thankfully, eastern suburbs less so. But there's pieces that you can do at the planning level, at the state level, and that's mainly local and state. But you can actually make a difference in terms of the experience of extreme heat and the mental health impacts of that. But finally, more broadly on mental health, I think this is an opportunity really for the state and federal governments to work together for better mental health, and for communities like Wentworth to have greater transparency in terms of the services that are available, the waiting times and costs that are available. Because I've spoken to many people actually who've tried to access mental health supports in this community, and it is unclear. There are long waiting lists, but that's not everywhere. So I think if we have greater transparency, and we actually have greater working between transparency of waiting lists, transparency and focus there, and then finally working with across the state and the federal governments to say, how do we support their mental health also at a preventative level and with our community and school kids, then I think those are also important parts of mental health response. Thank you.
I have to confess is Labor generally is very good on health topics, and I'm sure we do have more money put aside for mental health. There's been a large incidence of mental illness in my family. It's something that's very close to my heart. And I think for that reason, I understand the problems that you're facing in your career. And I think the community is better now at acknowledging it and planning around it. If I look at the school that my son goes to, which in some ways is quite backwards, they've got quite a good policy and developing a better policy for dealing with mental health in the school playground. But if I come to climate change and health, We need to avoid catastrophizing in order to protect our youth. We need to focus on the positive actions that each one of us can take in our life to help them focus on the positive things. I think catastrophizing is harmful. And that's why if we have a government that's in place that's taking action on climate change, I think it will flip the mental health of our teenagers. Teenagers are freaked out, because it's like in the old days when you had nuclear wars and people would do drills to get under their tables. That comes at a cost. So I think by taking action on climate change, it will create a better environment for the mental health of our youth. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I know that taking action is meaningful action is actually a big part of it. And I know that because the Doctors for the Environment have briefed me and told me and come back and shared all the information with it. So I just want to credit for what you're doing in this election campaign. Because a lot of that knowledge has come from those detailed briefings that you've given us in terms of that mental health impact of effective change. I mean, it's already part of our policy platform to do meaningful change, but to know it has a mental health positive impact, we're really grateful for that additional information. But we also have a policy of putting dental and mental into Medicare and doing that really. We can't work out why it's not already in Medicare, why Medicare stops at teeth and why it stops at mental health. We can't work out why it's not. And we think that would actually be a significant national game changer for that. And I also think we should realise I'm not one of these don't look up and don't recognise that there's a climate catastrophe if we don't act, because I think we need to know that. And in fact, young people know it already. And trying to pretend it's not really bad if we don't deal with it is not going to answer the concerns of young people. They know better than anyone else in this room that over the next 40 to 50 years, as they go through their life on this planet, if we don't deal with climate change, they're in a world of trouble. And they want politics to respond to that. And they want Parliament to actually listen and legislate and fix it. And we need to do that. I mean, we just simply need to do that. But I was in Lismore last month, and I was talking to a professor of psychiatry up there. And he was talking about just the scale of the trauma. I mean, you go through Lismore, it's heartbreaking. I have many friends up there, gone there many years, and Lismore is just like a ghost town, like a sort of movie set where there's nobody there. It's just block after block after block. And the person was telling me that it's probably the largest collective trauma that Australia has experienced since World War II. Like tens of thousands of people deeply traumatised. I remember talking with the manager from the Courier Mail, who was in the first floor of his of a building in the middle of Lismore, and he knew where the 1974 flood came to, and he thought it was safe. He thought him and his wife and his two dogs were safe, but the water just kept rising and rising and rising. By the time it got to that, no one was there to rescue him. He had to smash a hole in the plaster, climb into the rafters, float his two dogs up on a surfboard, and deeply distressed, smash a hole in his roof and managed to knock a hole in the tin roof, and then waited there as the water kept rising and rising and rising until he got rescued by a jet ski, somebody on a jet ski, because there were no rescue vessels. And you just think about that trauma, that night that he had. It was all at night, that night that he had. You multiply that by tens of thousands of people across the Northern Rivers. You think about the collective trauma. We should be investing now in what will be the response to that trauma over the next 3 to 6 months, and doing proactively housing people, helping people out practically, and realising we've just got to deal with that level of trauma just from this one climate-induced extreme weather event. So I'm sorry to end on that note, but it is a lesson to all of us and a kind of warning bell about the scale of the mental health trauma if we don't deal with climate.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'd just like to, psychiatrist hat back on again for a second, just comment that actually people being here and being engaged and ready to take action is incredibly helpful for young people and the rest of our mental health around climate distress. And actually something that people might be interested, there's an article that the Doctors for the Environment have done, which is available freely online, called Young People's Anxiety is Valid, Not Caused by Climate Activism, which really covers this, because actually it's really important, because generally young people and children who are distressed about the climate are doing so in response to the scientific information, which actually they do need to know about, because it is actually facts about the world around them, in the same way that knowing how to cross the road is a fact about the world around them. And actually what we know is that by acknowledging people's distress and them seeing that you're taking action and helping them to take action that is meaning-based action is actually what reduces distress. So while people worry that when we talk about it we make it worse, there's actually not evidence for that. In fact, there's a large survey done of about 10,000 young people which shows that 57% of young people, including sort of teenagers from 15 up to 24-year-olds, feel betrayed by government's lack of action. So actually it's something that's really, it's great that you're all here, because actually that willingness to talk and take action is likely to help. So trying to flip that around a little bit, this is an opportunity to make a really positive change, and so grateful to everyone to being here. The other thing to say is that we're going to end the sort of formal part of the evening shortly. If any of you have time and are able to stay for some informal chat afterwards, you're very welcome to, but none of the candidates were asked to commit to that, so we do need to be respectful and friendly if they need to go after this. If there are questions that you've put that weren't answered or weren't asked this evening, what we will do as Doctors for the Environment is collate them and then check with the candidates if they are able to offer a response, and if that's possible we will make that available to everybody who's registered. So thank you very much everyone, and yeah, much appreciate everyone's support. The other thing I've just realised I need to say is what the Doctors for the Environment asks are for the election. So those of you who've looked at Doctors for the Environment and looked at the postcards will probably be aware that we've been asking to cut climate pollution this decade, so by 2030, at least in line with our trading partners, that we're asking as a policy to protect health to have no new coal, oil or gas. Just, I guess everyone here is probably well aware of that, but sometimes people don't seem to be aware that gas is very much a fossil fuel with the same bad climate impacts as coal, or similar, and we need to stop gas as well. That we want to transition people from who are in those communities where at the moment they're working in coal or gas or oil into new sustainable jobs, so that they're not left dealing with the impacts of this change that needs to happen. And we also want to protect biodiversity, because we know that by actually looking after our biodiversity, having nature be healthy around us, it's good for our health physically and mentally, and it is also good for protecting the climate. So those are our 4 asks, and please, when you vote, think about climate and health. Vote based on your own values and what you think is the right thing to do, and I would ask on behalf of Doctors for the Environment Australia that you all hold climate and health in mind. And do talk to your friends, family and anyone else that you can get to listen about this. And if anyone wants more information, we have a lot of information about health and impacts and ways of protecting it and things like that in terms of climate change. And Tim, I am sorry that I hadn't briefed you as much about the mental health as I had David. We did send our report to Labor as well, but Tim hadn't had the benefit of a specific briefing about that. So.
I'll read it.
Thank you, and thank you very much, everyone.